In October 2010, a new public-private partnership called 55,000 Degrees took on this mission with the support of local foundations to launch Louisville into the top tier of our competitor cities, with the bold goal of adding 40,000 bachelor's degrees and 15,000 associate's degrees by 2020. You know, and that goal, that transformational goal, will do what our mayor has challenged us to do, is to be best in the world, to be best that we can be, not to be satisfied with our own incremental progress, but to really set our sights on who is the best. We need to be in the top tier of educated cities, not only in this country, but in the world. And certainly, we appreciate Mayor Fisher stepping up to continue in the role that the mayor had served before as chair of 55,000 Degrees. It's a critical movement that will transform this community. ACA organizations already play a key role in educating students in the region, reaching well over 700 students a year with their educational programming, both in and outside of school hours. But they know they can do more, and they want to be leaders in supporting these bold educational goals, particularly because they know firsthand what a difference art and culture can make with how a student learns, feels about themselves, and how they feel about learning. They want you and others in this community to understand the transformational power of arts and culture and education. And when they were looking to bring someone to Louisville to help jumpstart this conversation, they thought big. James Catterall is professor of the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, where he has served on the curriculum and education policy faculty since 1981. His research focuses on the roles of the arts in human development. The key findings include that arts-involved students showed significantly greater doing well advantages, like going to and completing college, earning better grades, choosing employment fields with high growth potential, and higher levels of satisfaction in their work. All outcomes I think we from the business community would like to see. They also showed greater doing good advantages, including systematically higher levels of pro-social behavior, like educational and social volunteerism, as well as political participation, an outcome we all want as members of this community. His latest book, Doing Well and Doing Good by Doing Art, is the first longitudinal study about the lasting impact of arts education and provides important empirical evidence of the significant role that the arts play in preparing young people for success in school and life. And I'm told that Dr. Catterall has a Kentucky connection already. He was the chair of the National Technical Advisory Panel for Accountability and Assessment for the Commonwealth of Kentucky from 1998 to 2008, and of course was made a Kentucky colonel by Governor Paul Patton. So please welcome back to Kentucky, Dr. Colonel James Catterall.
Questions? It's a pleasure to be here. It is by my counting, my 76th trip to Kentucky from Los Angeles. I know the Frankfurt or the Lexington airport very well, the Louisville airport sort of well. I'm going to get to a point in my presentation a bit later when I make the claim that our high schools have to provide places for our kids to exercise their passions, whether that's art or theater or sports or a variety of things. And I think we had such an illustration of that this morning. Sabrina, I'm sure, had gone to school in the morning excited about what the day had in mind for her, to get involved with her theater. And then of course, see if I can get this right, the Hanover, Southwest, Busby, Berkeley, Intergalactic Touring Choir. Phenomenal. So much fun to see. And it's those things that we see in kids that let us know that something does work, and so forth. And I was thinking as I got to this stage, if you guys have a whole alphabet, you must have a really big story. Someone can explain it. I'm going to talk about the results. I'm going to talk about sort of the historical background of the work I've done that led up to the book. and I'm going to talk about some things.
Could you use the microphone a little more?
Oh, sure. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, all right. Going to talk more about where we've taken some of the ideas in the year or so since the book came out, all of which sort of play back on the notion of how you assemble an idea catalog, which I think is a great term, and it's a great subject for this morning. So I'm going to provide you with an overview of research on learning in the arts. I was driving in my car in the late 90s, and a popular news station told me that Mozart would make me smarter. And that was about the way that research observation of Fran Rauscher's, Gordon Shaw at UC Irvine came through to the public, and it was one that stuck. But it was also one that made me wonder, what's this all about? What's happening? And it really marked the beginning of an era that goes on through today, in which people who hadn't done much research, learning researchers who hadn't done much with the arts, took an interest. And between then and now, the numbers of studies that sort of piled up in journals, appeared on legislators' desks, relating the arts to various outcomes for kids, it grew geometrically. And between 90 and that 20-year period, hundreds of studies emerged that took a drama program or a music program and related those things to certain things that happened for kids. I'm going to show you a general characterization of those things in a minute. And there's been a period now is beginning where some interests are shifting to research on creativity and how we nurture that. And I think that's very important because we come up against statements today that go like this. They go, a high school principal will say, well, of course we're a creative high school. We've got a visual art program. And if you unpack that a little bit, maybe yes, maybe no. Because being creative in visual art is one thing, simply painting is another thing, and you're not quite sure. And then the period, we're moving into a period, and I'm going to illustrate a bit about that, of wondering, well, what's going on in our brains during all of this? Because we're seeing more. Our lenses are more powerful, our lot of stock of information about what things going on in the brain mean across a lot of disciplines, across a lot of idea making, and it seems time to begin to investigate those relationships, which I've been involved in, and I will tell you a bit about that. One of the this earlier period, and the book, which sort of sums it up with the big longitudinal study, were really a quest for connections between involvement in the arts, or doing things in the arts, or learning in the arts, and either academic or social development. And academic developments included test scores, it included grades in school, it included getting along academically, and social developments included things like motivation, doing socially positive things, and that whole period is characterized by those kinds of studies. These are examples of some things that came out of a big kind of summary study or a meta-analysis at Harvard University by Project Zero a few years ago. And they just illustrate the kinds of things that dot the literature, or did at that time. And I think a lot has gone on in the same stream since this came out. Visual arts has impact on reading skills, learning to play keyboard and mathematics, and that's grown a lot. Learning to play lots of musical instruments is shown to have connections to spatial reasoning because of the proportions involved in reading music, because of the proportions involved in on a cello fingerboard, which are pretty interesting. An interval is this wide here, and an interval is this wide here. It takes a very subtle understanding or feel for proportion. I don't think you think about proportion when I do that. It just feels right because I've played it a lot.
Drama and recall of stories, sure. Kids who dramatize something are going to understand more of it, they're going to recall it. But they're also going to understand characters and understand their own characters if they're playing in a dramatic production. And so most drama studies show something having to do with verbal skills. Hard to imagine that not being true. But then researchers, that doesn't stop researchers. They go after things they know are true and then sign on the bottom line and they are true. Learning to play music and spatial temporal reasoning. And spatial reasoning is huge. There are, the last time I looked, just searching online, I found references to 3,000 studies relating artificial intelligence to spatial reasoning. A big component of artificial intelligence, or a big component of intelligence, is your ability to place things in context. And that is almost a definition of spatial reasoning. How do things relate to each other in space, conceptually? And spatial reasoning is a hugely important skill. It's not one we typically think about. We don't think about it teaching in schools, but one way or another we develop spatial intelligence by walking around, by solving geographical problems, but we do it when we speak, we do it when we think in mathematical terms, and music provides a good kick to one's spatial reasoning skills. And music listening. It's not just playing music. Music listening has similar effects. This is me at age 12. Okay, so I picked up the National Educational Longitudinal Study, which was a project sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education. It was done by the National Opinion Research Corporation in Chicago, NORC. $10 million project that identified 25,000 kids in 8th grade back in 1988. And they took kids from every state, they sampled, identified 1,000 high schools, and they took 25 kids from each high school on a random sampling basis. And they surveyed them, they tested them, they surveyed their parents, they took every kid and surveyed 2 of that kid's teachers about the kid, had the kid answer lots of questions about sort of who they were and what their aspirations were and how they felt about this and that, and out of that came measures of things like motivation and community involvement and that sort of thing. And that database continued to grow. 2 years later in 10th grade, they resurveyed everybody. 2 years later in 12th grade, they resurveyed everybody. By the 12th grade panel, they still had 21 to 22,000 kids in the survey. So there are 2 reasons that an academic couldn't have done this. One is it would be impossible to raise the funds and organize, from an academic's perspective, a survey like that. It's just too massive. And second, even a bigger problem would be following kids and keeping track of them that long. We can do studies that are 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 20 weeks long and only expect to lose 20% of the kids. This project went on to age 26, ultimately 12 years, and they still had 16,000 kids in the sample, and they had 12,000 with data points at every point. So 12,000 participated every 5 years. And this database has supported more than 1,000 studies in language development, mathematics, science, social development in one way or another, inner city pathologies with social development, just one thing or another. It supported one study in the arts, which was mine. And there are a couple of explanations for that. I guess one of them is most people studying the arts back when I looked at this database first didn't really want to deal with numbers. Or they weren't accustomed to dealing with numbers. They weren't in the arts because they liked numbers. And I had been a math teacher in high school, and my quantitative skills were good, and I did studies dealing with quantitative relationships. So this was just a candy store for me, because there was so much information